It can be hard to find St. Johannes Cemetery unless you know where to look. It was much easier to find 150 years ago when this was all farmland, but its surroundings now are much different. The gravestones and memorials of lives gone by are now just a short walk away from a runway. St. Johannes is surrounded by O'Hare International Airport. There are soldiers here, mothers, fathers, and people who hope to join their spouses someday. But that may not ever happen, and all the other permanent residents may have to move. Why? A City of Chicago plan to grow the airport even larger is threatening to wipe out the cemetery completely. St. John's Church of Bensenville owns this land, and officials say the cemetery should never be disturbed.
That's sacred ground, okay? That's sacred ground. It's a cemetery. It's a place where you go to bury your dead, with some sense of that this is a final resting spot.
Michael is a member of the St. John Cemetery Alliance. He and the other members say the City of Chicago has been uncooperative since the get-go.
This was announced in the paper. This is what's going to happen. This is the plan. Cemeteries are going to be destroyed. Parts of the village are going to be taken. Declared in the news, and that's how we found out about it, by reading it in the paper. We weren't even approached beforehand by the city and saying, hey, this is our plans, this is just so we know what to expect.
50 years ago, the airport was growing to its current size to help alleviate some of the rush at Midway. St. John's Church stood where this cross is now. But the church did find a sympathetic ear in City Hall.
The pastor of the church actually sat down with the first Mayor Daley and had a conversation, and they talked about matters of faith. And the first Mayor Daley recognized the fact that the church regarded the cemetery as a sacred piece of property.
As part of that agreement, the church moved to its location in Bensenville, but the cemetery stayed. Now, times have changed, and instead of the mayor and the pastor discussing matters face to face, that job has been taken up by the attorneys. The small congregation of St. John's Church and the mighty City of Chicago are in the 6th year of a legal battle.
We're not going to back down. There's no question about that. We said that 6 years ago, and we're still in this, and it's likely to go on for quite a bit longer.
Bob Sell is a spokesman for the church. Like many of the volunteers, he has a personal connection. Sell has 5 generations of his family buried in the cemetery.
The City of Chicago has been very aggressive in terms of how they've treated the church, things that they have done with respect to the property, locking the gate, having circumstances where out at the companion cemetery we had burials and City of Chicago officials were observing the burials, which is just a real invasion of not only privacy but sort of the sanctity of a burial.
Other problems include the O'Hare Modernization Act and Illinois Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Both were passed in the Illinois legislature. They specifically stripped this cemetery of protection. Sell says the case could have terrifying ramifications should the church lose.
This case, without a doubt, is getting incredible attention in the federal court system. And when the ultimate decision comes out, it's going to be binding precedent for all of them. So I guess what I would say is, if you haven't taken an interest in the case yet, do it. Because our case is going to be significant for you in whatever church or synagogue or mosque you may choose to practice your faith.
Church officials say they hope the Supreme Court will eventually become involved. They want to force the City of Chicago to build the runway just a little bit north of the cemetery or even a little bit south. They say the people who have loved ones here won't mind a little more noise every time they come for a visit.
Prayers are always going up over this, yes, and they have been for 6 years. I pray for it and I work for it, and in the end trust that God will see it through to its proper end.
Despite repeated attempts, the City of Chicago was not available for comment. For Jacob Laub, I'm Zach Spear.